Thank you. Good to be here. Wow, this is a pretty good turnout. How was yesterday? Did it go well? My friend Martin Waxman lead you astray at all, or a little bit? Yeah, Martin and I work together. It's really nice to be back at McMaster. As Devin just indicated, I spent 6 years of my life here, getting an engineering degree and getting involved with student politics. And those were 6 very important years in my life. I'm not sure where I would be today had I not come to McMaster, or I'm not sure who I would be had I not come. So you're in a good place. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I either talk just about social media or I talk just about my novels. I have sort of 2 different lives. Today I'm going to kind of combine them a little bit. How many of you are on Facebook? Okay, how many of you are not on Facebook? Okay, 1. Okay, that's good. How many of you are reading blogs? Is anyone actually blogging? Who's blogging? Okay, good. Who listens to podcasts? Hey, that's great. When I started doing a talk like this about 5 years ago, when I asked that question, nobody would put their hand up. Is anyone podcasting, actually producing a podcast? Okay, not yet, but soon. Twitter? Who's on Twitter? Okay, that's great. Well, what I'm going to do a little bit is I want to talk a little bit about the underpinnings of social media. All of us know how to use the tools. We're all familiar with them. I sometimes worry that we leap on to the tools without really understanding the roots of social media and what's really important, and some of the governing principles that may not be written down anywhere, but if you run afoul of them, it won't be a great experience for you. So to do that, I want to go back in time a little bit. In the beginning, we had the village square, and word of mouth was king. That's what sold products, that's what changed minds, it's what persuaded people to vote in certain ways. And it was all very nicely self-contained, and word spread very, very quickly. If you were in the village square and you walked up to someone and you really liked the pair of shoes they were wearing, you could say, "Where did you get those shoes?" And he said, "Well, I got them in the cobbler store over here in the corner, and they took my measurements and they customized this pair of shoes for me, and I love them." And then you can go and do exactly the same thing. Word of mouth is what made the world go round. The problem with word of mouth is that it's not scalable, really. At least back then, it wasn't scalable. If you lived outside the village square, or if you ran a stable or a bakery that wasn't in this village square, you suffered a little bit. Word of mouth was what drove the economy and really what drove society. Jump ahead a little bit, and we invented, I don't know whether it was a good thing or not, but we invented mass media, where companies could indiscriminately just cover us with messages, whether we wanted to get them or not. How many people you get direct mail campaigns in your mailbox every day? How many of you look at all of those direct mail pieces before you throw them in the garbage can? Recycling bin. Recycling bin. Not many, exactly. Do you know what a good return rate on a direct mail campaign is in this country? For every 100 pieces of mail that goes out, what's a good response rate? 2 to 3%, exactly. 2 to 3%. So you're setting a lot of your money on fire to get 3% back. Now, it's an important part of the marketing mix. Advertising is an important part of the marketing mix, but it's not the only thing available. Do you know what it costs to run a full-page, full-color ad in the national edition of the Globe and Mail? 1 insertion? Any guesses? $75,000. $75,000 is what it costs to run a full-page, full-color ad in the national edition of the Globe and Mail for 1 day. And how many of us flip right by it when we're reading the paper? And that's what happens. So mass media, the challenge with it is that it's very expensive, and it's by definition one-way communications. You get that direct mail piece from the local dry cleaner. You don't care about it, you don't want it, yet there it is in your mailbox. So, 1999, anyone read this book? The Clue Train Manifesto, written by 4 very smart guys I think the roots of social media can be found in this book. This was really probably the first book that posited this idea of the conversational economy, that talked about the power of conversation. They did a bunch of research, they pulled a theory together, and they presented it. Now, I think the 10th anniversary edition came out a couple of years ago. It's worth reading because you can see the roots of Twitter, the roots of Facebook, the roots of blogging and podcasting in the pages of this book. And as we jump ahead to the future, now social media is really driven by conversation and by trust. Trust is an important word in social media. Edelman, a big PR agency, does this annual trust barometer where they ask people around the world, who do you trust? And interestingly enough, when it comes to selling products, we don't trust the people who sell the products. We don't trust the president of the company who sells the product. If there's a movie we want to go see, or a restaurant, we don't trust the owner of the restaurant. We don't trust the star of the movie, the director of the movie. We don't trust what we read about it in the newspaper or hear on the radio. Do you know who we trust most about such things? Our friends, our neighbors, our families, people like us. That's who we trust. I read a review in the newspaper about a movie. It gets 1 star out of 4. I talk to my brother. He loved it. I go to it. I usually like it as well. So trust is an important factor in social media. And social media, well, it's all about trust. It's all about conversation. That's what's driving the economy these days. So you are wise to be in the middle of social media because it is changing the landscape. It's changing the ground, the shifting ground between us, beneath us, certainly as communicators. Time magazine recognized it back in 2007 when their annual Person of the Year edition, you can't really tell from this picture, but you may recall there was sort of a mirror type surface on that computer terminal so that you could see yourself when you looked in the magazine. And you are in charge of this new information age. You can choose what you want to consume, when you want to consume it, how you want to consume it, whether it's on your computer, on your iPod, on your TV. You are in charge, and social media has helped to give you that power. So I thought we should talk just briefly about the governing principles of social media. Too often we forget about these because they're not really written down anywhere. There's starting to be some books now about social media where you can read a bit about this. But the first two really important, transparency and authenticity. If you don't honor the rules of transparency and authenticity and are discovered, you will be pilloried in the social media space, particularly if you're high profile. So transparency, tell the truth, be clear about who you are and what you do, speak in your own voice. A couple of examples. Walmart a few years ago, there was this interesting program called Walmarting Across America. And it was these two people who jumped in a Winnebago, like a camper van, and they drove across America. And in Walmarts, you can camp in their parking lots for free. Any parking lot, any Walmart across the country, you can just pull in and stay overnight there. So they started a blog called Walmarting Across America and chronicled their journey across the country in this Winnebago. To the unsuspecting observer following it online who may have subscribed to their RSS feed, it looked like a spontaneous kind of idea by these two people. It was not. Walmart paid for it. It was a PR agency who proposed the idea. It looks like there's just these two people driving across America talking about, oh, I was in the Walmart in Tennessee today and it was a great place and blah, blah, blah. And they talk about the store and they talk about their trip. And it was, great PR for Walmart, except Walmart was paying for the whole thing. Not transparent, not authentic, and they paid a heavy price in the social media space for it, as did the PR agency that had proposed it. Another one, Sony PSP. Remember when that PSP came out, that player? There were these two guys who started a blog that said, I want a PSP. And they didn't have enough money to get one, so they just kept writing post after post about how cool this thing was and why it was better than everything else that was on the market. Unfortunately, Sony was paying for them to do that. It looked spontaneous, it looked like a grassroots uprising. It was not. It was not authentic, it was not transparent, and Sony paid the price for that for a while. So transparency and authenticity, really important. We sometimes have clients, I run a PR agency, we sometimes have clients who say to us, I'd like to start a blog, I'd like our president to blog, and I'd like you people to write the blog post for our president. And we simply say, we cannot do that. We will build the blog for your president, we will set it up, we will teach him how to blog or her how to blog, we will give them the rules, but we will not blog for the president. It's not, it's just not how it works. So when you are blogging and when you are on Facebook, when you are podcasting or on Twitter, be transparent, be authentic. Whenever I tweet about a client project I'm working on, I always insert the word client in brackets in any tweet that I do. I never sacrifice that word because it's important that my audience knows that I'm talking about a client that we're working for. So, important. Timeliness. The web waits for no one. A few years ago, McDonald's had something called their what was it called? Their corporate social responsibility blog, their CSR blog. And during that time, in the Happy Meal, they were handing out as the toy a little dinky toy Hummer, the gas-guzzling SUV. And this set off a storm of protest in the United States from people who thought we should not be teaching our children that it's okay to drive these giant gas-guzzling machines when we have greenhouse gases pumping into the air and an ozone layer that's thinning and temperatures rising and all of that. So a whole bunch of comments came into the McDonald's corporate social responsibility blog. They created a post on a Friday afternoon to explain their position, and then, like most people on a Friday afternoon, they went home for the weekend. Over the course of the weekend, all sorts of comments came through to the blog. But of course, no one was staffing the McDonald's corporate social responsibility blog at that time, so the comments weren't being moderated, and they were just stacking up in the queue. They weren't appearing on the blog, which set off another blog storm on the Sunday because, my comments are being censored. McDonald is not putting any of these comments up on the blog. That's an outrage, blah, blah, blah. And that wasn't really what was happening. They just weren't at work. So they came back to work on Monday morning, saw this giant backlog of negative comments, and they dutifully posted all of them, as they should. That's part of transparency. But they missed the timeliness issue. The web waits for nobody, so if you've got comments on your waiting to be moderated on your blog, if you've got tweets that have come into you, don't wait too long, because you need to respect the audience and the community that you have built up around you. Finally, conversation. Social media is all about conversation. It's all about two-way, a way to engage your listeners, your readers, your community. So I know a few people who don't like to deal with comments on their blogs, and they have disabled the comment function on their blog. To me, when you do that, it's no longer a blog. It's just a website. So conversation is important. It's a vehicle for engaging your audiences. So take advantage of it. And don't just wait for comments to come into your blog. Go and I hope you're commenting on blogs that you're reading as well. That's part of the engagement of social media. So those are sort of the governing principles. They're important to follow. There are lots of other ones, but these are sort of the big ones, particularly transparency and authenticity. Be yourself on it. Building trust is what it's all about. That's what social media is. And when you're looking for a job, you want people to trust you as well. So, use sound judgment, understand the governing principles and respect them. Employers are going to be checking you out. When I get an application for a job now in our firm, I'll read the resume, but if I'm interested in the person, I immediately go online and I Google them. And I check them out. 9 times out of 10, they've got a Facebook presence. Sometimes they're on Twitter. Sometimes they have a blog. I read all of that stuff. And then I make a judgment. Is the person I'm reading about in the resume the person who is reflected in their social media presence, their digital footprint? Sometimes they are not the same people, it seems. So you've probably been on Facebook for quite a few years. You may want to take a look back in your Facebook and the photos that you've posted and just see if that's the same person who is applying for the job at the Bank of Nova Scotia in Hamilton. So build an appropriate digital image. Choose the platforms that make sense. For most of you, if jobs is on top of your list, LinkedIn is an obvious choice for you to be focused on. And definitely be yourself. Because when I go to Facebook and I find a photo like this from somebody who is applying for a job, you know, not sure they're going to get it's probably unfair to write this person off because they have this photo on their Facebook page. But it does display a certain lack of judgment if this is there for everyone to see and she's out there trying to find a job. I just pulled this photo from random. I don't know who it is. I hope she's not here today. But so, you know, just think about the presence that you're having in the social media space. Question?
What about the idea that an age of exposure has to be an age of forgiveness?
I totally agree. And it is an age of forgiveness, generally. But when you're hiring somebody, putting your money down on the table to bring somebody in, you want to know about them. You want to trust in them. And as I say, is it unfair to exclude this person from a job because she has that photo? Probably. I mean, I did some wild things in university. You people are probably still doing wild things now. But you are online for everybody to see. It is universal exposure. So just some judgment. Yes, be yourself, but if this is who you really are and who you want to be in the future, it's going to be tough to find a job. So, sir.
You know, taking into consideration that photos, photo says 1,000 words or what have you, beyond photos,
Yeah.
let's say the issue I struggle with is as I'm blogging, some of the ideas that I want to talk about or share with my friends online,
Right.
might not necessarily translate really well into a professional setting. But having said this, where do you draw the line? Isn't this supposed to be a space where I can vent and talk and be honest with my peers about what I'm feeling? And just because I can do that doesn't there might be a huge dichotomy between my professional life and my personal life.
Yeah.
Doesn't that create a bias for the employer?
Yeah, it does a little bit, and it's sort of the reality of the wild, wild west of the online world, where there aren't that many rules. But people are still making judgments on you. I understand what you're saying, and I've written some blog posts that I probably wouldn't have written had I not already been further advanced in my career, and there wasn't really an implication. You're kind of in a more vulnerable position at this stage in your life when you're trying to land a job. So it's, you have to just use your judgment, and it's a balancing act. If you're doing stuff on Facebook, you can change your privacy settings so that only those who are your friends can actually see what you're doing. So there are things you can do to mitigate the likelihood of what you're writing being universally viewed and judged. But it is, most of the time, it's open for everybody to see. So it just requires some judgment. There's not an easy answer to it. Just think a little bit when you're writing something and make sure that you're comfortable with what the implications might be. So there's no easy answer. Okay? So that's sort of my little speech about social media in general. But Dave told me to ask me if I would talk a bit about my own story with social media. I started podcasting in about 2005, I guess, about a year after it hit. We started a show, a weekly half-hour podcast called Inside PR. I'm sure you're all subscribed and are listening to it. It continues today, though. After 200 episodes, without missing a week, I handed the mic over to a colleague, so I'm no longer on the show. But I knew how to podcast, and it was still in its infancy back then. It's probably still in its infancy now. Podcasting hasn't really taken off the way most of us at that time thought it would. I remember thinking in my office, we've got to start this podcast right now because in 2 weeks there could be another PR podcast starting. We want to be first in the market. And now, 5, 6 years later, we're still the only public relations podcast coming out of Canada. So it hasn't really swamped our shores the way I think we thought it would. But at the same time, I was writing a novel in my spare time. I started writing it in 2004 and finished it in 2005. And as Devin mentioned, when I finished my manuscript, I sent it out to agents and publishers across the country in the hopes that there would be this feeding frenzy over my blockbuster debut novel. And I waited, and I waited, and I followed up, and I waited, and I heard nothing. I did not get a single rejection letter, nothing. It was as if I dug a big hole in the backyard and dumped all the stuff in there. I heard nothing, so I thought, well, why don't I self-publish the novel? And self-publishing has become very easy, perhaps too easy. And I would try and build an audience for it myself. And I read an article in the New York Times about a guy named Scott Sigler, who's a thriller writer, who's now a New York Times best-selling author. Back then, he couldn't find a publisher either, so he podcasted his entire novel and threw it out there on the internet for free, and gathered thousands of listeners around him, signed a publishing deal, and became a best-selling author. No one had done it in Canada at the time. I didn't know that then, but I learned since. So I thought, well, I know how to podcast. Why don't I podcast the novel? And that's what I did. I would come home on a Friday night, and I would, after a hard week at the office, I would read a chapter of my manuscript into my digital recorder. Then I would pull it into my computer into a program called Audacity, which is a free download. Anyone are using Audacity? A few people are, yeah. It's a free download. It's quite easy to use. It takes a little bit of time to get the hang of it, but once you do, it's fine. So I would slap some music on the front, some music on the back, and then I would upload it to my podcast host, Libsyn, Liberated Syndication, probably the largest podcast hosting service. It costs about a whopping $6 a month for me to host my podcasts, and they put the RSS feed on it. They also send it to iTunes. So you can get your podcast on iTunes after about a 24-hour delay. iTunes, the folks at Apple will take a listen to the first 20 seconds or so and make sure that it's of reasonable quality, and they'll let it come through to their iTunes store. So I did all of that. I also hosted it on my blog. So you could find my podcast of the novel in all sorts of different places. It went out to tons of different podcast directories. And I sat back and I waited to see what would happen. It was a grand experiment in social media. And lo and behold, people started finding it. I looked at the stats, and you can get stats. Libsyn provides you with all sorts of numbers and how many people are downloading it and listening to it. We're up to about 90,000 downloads now on the podcast. So people were finding it. And I started to get some comments. And I thought only people in Canada might be interested in a novel about Canadian politics. But I started getting comments from people all over the world. My favorite two were these two. This guy, Nicholas McNabb, after about chapter 2, I think, he emailed me and said, I live in a rural village on the west coast of Scotland in single malt country. And one of the characters in my novel likes single malt scotch. And his single malt scotch of choice is Lagavulin. In the first 2 chapters of the podcast, I was not pronouncing it Lagavulin. What do I know? I'm not a scotch drinker. I was pronouncing it Lagavulin. So this guy emails me, and I didn't put the whole thing here, but he said, love the story, blah, 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 but you're mispronouncing Lagavulin, because he lived about 2 blocks from the Lagavulin distillery. So he spelled it out phonetically for me, Lagavulin. And the next chapter, chapter 3, I think still it's there. If you listen to chapter 3 in the podcast, I start by thanking him for correcting my pronunciation, and then I go on to read chapter 3. So this is the kind of insight and community building that you can do with podcasting. The other one that was fun was this guy Steve in Shanghai. It was a Sunday night. I was sitting in the desk at home I uploaded chapter 9 about 90 minutes earlier. I'm still sitting in the same chair working on a client presentation for the next day, and I get an email that says, "Hi, my name is Steve, blah, 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 great, enjoying listening to your novel, blah, blah, blah." I'm sitting in my car, stuck in a traffic jam just outside of Shanghai on my way to work. And I could never have endured the boredom of this traffic jam had I not been able to download chapter 9 just before leaving for work this morning. So I'm still sitting in the same chair that 90 minutes earlier I'd uploaded this chapter. And on the other side of the world, on the other side of the international date line, somebody has already listened to chapter 9 stuck in a traffic jam outside of Shanghai. And I thought, what an amazing technology this is, that you can have that kind of reach. And that's really what social media is. And this feedback and this conversation. I mean, I would respond to all of these comments as soon as I got them in. So you build up a following, you build up an audience, and that was my intention. When I finished the podcast, and it was one chapter a week, and there are 20 chapters, so I was done the podcast by May, I had started the blog purely as a host for the podcast. And when it finished, I thought, well, what am I going to do now with this blog? And I decided I would start blogging, which seemed like a logical conclusion since I had a blog. So I started blogging about my writing experiences. My blog is not about my day job as a PR professional. It's about my writing life. So I blog to build that audience, to keep my profile high, because I want to sell more books. It promotes my writing. I want Google to be able to find me. In other words, if Google can find me, it means other people out there who might be interested in my writing or interested in my books might be able to find me too. I'm interested in conversation. So I get comments on my blog, and I will respond to them, and we'll begin this little back and forth. And really, it's become, I sort of think of it as a digital scrapbook for this unexpected journey into the world of literature that I have somehow managed to be taking. So it's nice to have this going all the way back. The first blog post that you will find was from January of 2007, which was the day before I launched the first chapter of the first novel on the podcast. So, who's using WordPress on their blog? Anyone using TypePad? Anyone using Blogger? Anyone using anything else? Tumblr? So there are lots of options for you to use. And you can even blog for however long you want without posting anything until you find your voice. I always think that's good advice, to write a few posts, get a feel for the routine of blogging, get your views out there in a way that you think is going to help you, and when you're comfortable with your voice, then you can publish those posts and begin to do it kind of publicly. You don't have to do it right away. Sometimes blogs go through different evolutions. It starts as one thing, and then you really find your voice and realize you're talking about other stuff. So you can do that behind the firewall if you like. Important for them to find you, that if you're going to blogging at least once a week, you want to keep the Google juice up. And if you know what I mean by that? Google sends out its spiders to look for content that has changed. Blogs are wonderful because there's usually new content on blogs quite regularly, and that keeps your Google rankings higher. Shorter posts with links and pictures, you want to send people out to other places, and you become a trusted resource, a trusted source of information. Tagging your posts, is everyone tagging their posts? Not just your blog, but your posts themselves? Do tag your posts. That's what makes you searchable. I'll show you how to do that. You want to make Google your friend. Google loves blogs. Websites, just HTML sites, fall lower on the Google rankings because blogs keep updating their information. They get higher Google rankings. So on WordPress, you want to make sure that you're tagging. And this is where you tag on WordPress. There'll be a spot to do it in all of the other blogging platforms that are out there. I tag all of my posts Canadian political novel. I mean, this post is just about a book event that I did somewhere, and yet I still tagged it Canadian political novel. I haven't tagged it Canadian political novel for any other reason than I want to kind of own that that space. If someone's searching for a book about politics and they type in Canadian political novel, I want them to find me. So if you do type in Canadian political novel into Google, this is what you get. And if I number each of those hits that has something to do with my novel, this is the first page of Google, you can see that I think there's only 2 hits on the first page of Google that don't have something to do with my novel. This is not because I've written the world's best Canadian political novel. It's got nothing to do with that. This ranking is as it is simply because I tag every single one of my blog posts Canadian political novel. So if you are writing a blog about knitting and you want to boost your Google juice, tag your posts Canadian knitting blog or something like that, each one, and that will help drive your Google juice and make it easier for people to find you. And we blog in search of an audience. You're reaching out, trying to build a community. That's why you're blogging, presumably. So that's something that you ought to be thinking about. Facebook, everyone's on Facebook. I'm on Facebook with my, both with my novels and, oh, well, this is something that happened earlier on, back in 2007 when my novel was still self-published before it had been picked up by another publisher. And somebody in Australia thought it would be a good idea to start this trend where they would take a photograph just of my book cover in wherever city or country they happen to be in. And before too long, these pictures started popping up on Facebook. This is Dealey Plaza. This is the Dallas Book Depository. I think Lee Harvey Oswald shot President Kennedy from that window right there. And so someone took a picture of my book in front of it for some reason. This is a marketplace in Hanoi. This is Parliament Hill, obviously. And there are now dozens of photos that just appear on Facebook with the self-published version of my first novel. I didn't do any of that. I didn't start that. I just observed it with some amusement and delight. But social media, it's a community that you create, and these things will happen spontaneously if they like what you're doing. So some authors have a special author page on Facebook and their own personal page. I am one and the same in Facebook. I have sort of one presence in Facebook. So that's a decision that authors or business people or others make, is how many different identities do you want or presences do you want in, on Facebook. I just have one so that it's not confusing. I did use Facebook for my book launch and that sort of thing. It's a great way to invite people. Great infrastructure there that you can use. There's also a reading and book club kind of function on Facebook, and my novels are on there, so I look at that now and then. So all these tools are here for you to enhance your profile and to reach out to an audience. YouTube, how many of you have posted stuff to YouTube? Yeah, and how many of us look at YouTube every day? Yeah, how many of us spend far too long looking at YouTube every day? I know, I'm like that too. The idea is you can broadcast yourself. You are in charge. So there's a bunch of stuff on YouTube related to my novel. Some of the stuff I've posted there just as a way to keep my profile high. Other stuff, other people have posted there. But it's a great place to build community as well. And video is really, I think, the future of the internet. YouTube is the largest search engine in the world. People think it's Google. It's not, it's YouTube. It's unbelievable how much new content is put up there every day. Twitter, people thought Twitter wasn't going to make it. I think Twitter is here to stay. They've passed that hump, and I think it's going to be around for a long time. How many on Twitter again? How many of you are using some kind of a third-party aggregator to make it easier to use Twitter? Good. How many of you are just using the straight Twitter site? Those of you who are just using the Twitter site, think about some of these other options. Depending on how many people you follow, this is TweetDeck, by the way. It's a free download. You can set up different columns. You can segregate. This is my writing column. These are all the people I follow related to books. Those are all my friends over here. The mentions come and then direct messages. It's just a nice way to bring it together and to scan through Twitter a little more easily than simply an endless scroll of all the people you follow. You can pull out different groups and create these columns. It's a good way to do it. Anyone using an iPad, Twitter on their iPad? The Twitter app on iPad is not bad. You can sort of set up these different columns too. Not quite in this same way, but there are ways to make it easier as opposed to just drinking from the fire hose that Twitter often is. So, in summary, understand and respect the governing principles of social media so that you don't run afoul of them. Employers are going to check you out when you're looking for jobs. Gone are the days where you get hired on a cover letter and a resume. You have a digital presence. You have made a footprint in the digital space, in the online world, in the social media world. Don't assume that people aren't going to find you or that they aren't going to look for you. They probably will. Hiring is important. They want to get the right people, so they want to get underneath the resume, get underneath the cover letter, and find out more about you as a person. So they'll often do that before they've even met you. That's what I do. Choose the tools wisely. If you're looking for a job, LinkedIn screams out at me as the obvious choice for you to be spending time. Everyone on LinkedIn? Most of you? It's a good place to build a presence, and that's the first place an employer is likely to go, actually, is to check you out on LinkedIn. Thoughtful creativity. You can set yourself apart from the others. You can do that by writing interesting blog posts. You can do it by posting interesting videos. You can do it by pointing people to thoughtful articles and that you're interested in, that they might be interested in. Think about how you can separate yourself, because if everyone's on LinkedIn now, you're no longer distinct because you're on LinkedIn. So you've got to do more to set yourselves apart. You can find me various places, and delighted to answer questions that you may have. How are we doing on time? Oh, perfect timing. Questions, thoughts, concerns, issues. Settle down, everyone, please. Questions? Not a one? Yes.
So, is it worse to be on Facebook and be unsearchable as opposed to have like a well set up with like well connected?
Let's see. Make sure I understand your question. You mean, is it better to make sure your Facebook is arranged in a way that is going to serve your purpose but also help you find a job? Is that?
Yeah, versus not being searched.
Yes.
Preventing people from searching.
Well, it depends. I mean, I think it's fine for us to have our own private lives, and I don't think it's a bad thing for you to decide, of all my social media platforms that I'm involved in, Facebook is going to be the one I use to connect with my friends on a more personal and private level, and for you to set your privacy settings accordingly. I think that's fine, and I respect people when they do that, because it tells me that they've thought about it a little bit and they've made that decision. And your blog might be public for everybody to see, as it probably is, but Facebook, I'm going to keep that to myself. That's a judgment that I think you can make on your own. Each person's going to feel differently about it. I haven't done that for me because I want people to be able to find me, because I hope they'll buy a book or invite me to speak somewhere and that sort of thing. So, but whatever you want to use Facebook for, just make sure you've thought it through. I don't think it's a bad thing to keep that one private if that's the platform you choose to connect with your friends on in a more sort of informal way. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that you should turn Facebook into a job center for yourself and a resume. I don't mean that at all. Want you to be yourself, but you may want to not put your mug shot from that arrest you had in 1999 on your Facebook page. That's all. But there was a question at the back.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you about your personal experiences. You have a day job as a senior rep, and I don't know if it's but you have used your social media skills really effectively, so much so that many people see you as the person you are in the social media life, so to speak. How do you manage it? Does it
Yeah, it's a good question. Did everyone hear the question? I think you're right in that probably more people, even though I've been practicing public relations for more than 20 years, and I have been involved in social media almost from the very beginning, I think it's probably true that more Canadians would know me now as a writer and have no idea that I had a social media presence before that, or that I have been practicing public relations professionally in an agency setting since 1988. I mean, they wouldn't know that. That's just the nature of the beast. So it is a little bit, I mean, people are surprised to know that I have a full-time job. They think that I'm just a writer. And if they understood the economics of being a novelist, they would probably understand why I still work full-time, although I'd love to write full-time. So yeah, there is a bit of confusion. I do have I sort of think I have three lives. I have my home and family life, I have my professional day job life as a PR professional, and I have my writing life. And most of my social media presence has now oriented towards my writing life. So there is a little bit of split personality happening now and then. It does take my focus off my day job a little bit, because I'm balancing all of this stuff during the day as well, because you have to be timely when you're dealing with the social media space. So yeah, it's a bit confusing for some people. Luckily, I'm able to juggle it reasonably well, it seems. But so. Yes?
Sort of working off what you just said, I hope people sort of assume that you're just a writer since you have such a presence on the blogosphere as a writer. When it comes to, I guess, us who are trying to make a presence for ourselves on the internet, should we be worried if we have a YouTube channel, Facebook, a LinkedIn, and a Twitter, and a Tumblr? Should we be worried that future employers are looking at that and saying, how can this person have such a presence online? What good would he or she be to my company as an employee?
Yeah, it's good. Well, there's a couple of ways to look at that. The question was, do you worry that your social media presence, if it's not related to banking, if it's a bank who's thinking about hiring, do I want to hire that person? And it really depends on the person who's hiring you. I, for one, always look for people who are well-rounded. I love to hire people who have a passion about something other than public relations. I think it inflicts a perspective on them, and it informs their judgment, and it enhances their judgment with clients, I think. So if you're just unidimensional, and if you set up, if you wanted to work in the banking field and just so you can get a job, you set up a blog just about banking, and I was the banker trying to hire you, that might not go over so well with me. So I think it's fine to have a broad and well-rounded presence. I think most employers are looking for people who are multi-dimensional. And this is, I think, the age, in a way, of the generalist. So I think it's fine.
As long as it's a positive presence.
Yes.
It's just about 2 years.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that's right, exactly. So, I mean, my son, he's 19. He did a development trip in Guatemala, I think it was. So he went there to build a school, and you know, he wrote about it a little bit. And I mean, if I were an employer, I think, well, that's kind of neat that young person volunteered his time to go down there and do that. So there are things that don't have to be related to the profession that will enhance your marketability in their minds. So, yes.
I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the temporary and future landscapes of publishing now that we have, that social media has really picked up, that the internet exists and so on. Sort of where you see writing going. I mean, you use both sort of a non-traditional format to publish, to first of all publish online, write podcasts, and then self-publish. And then of course you ended up sort of in the more traditional realm and benefited from sort of the award circuit and that kind of recognition.
Right.
So you've sort of been in both spheres. Now looking forward, where do you see your own work going in sort of that space, that publishing space going in general?
Well, it's a good question, and publishing is in an enormous state of flux right now, and they're trying to get a handle on the digital revolution. And I think most of them, even though they may be slow off the mark, are getting there now. I self-published as a last resort. I didn't want to self-publish. I don't think anybody really wants to self-publish. And having self-published, and now my last 2 novels and my 3rd one coming up next September are all published by McClellan and Stewart. it's better to be published by McClellan and Stewart. You get in bookstores, and but I do think that there are lots more opportunities for readers, for writers, and for publishers afforded by the digital revolution. There are lots of writers who have chosen not to self-publish, but are now actually making their books available as ebooks through Amazon and other services. And they're beginning to make a bit of a name for themselves in that world. And then they can go to a traditional publisher and say, look, I sold 1,500 copies of my ebook, and here's a sampling of the comments I got. And that's meaningful evidence from the marketplace that a publisher can use in deciding whether or not to take them on in a more traditional role. So I think there are lots of new opportunities. And those who think that the book is dead and that publishers are going to die, I think that the rise of e-readers and digital publishing presents more opportunities for publishers, writers, and readers than anything else. You just have to find the right way to navigate it. So I'm optimistic, but I am always a bit of a Pollyanna. The glass is always half full for me. So there are lots of sound arguments to explain why publishing is in a bit of a funk right now. But I think we're coming out of it because I think they're latching on to, rather than pushing away social media and the digital experience. Yes?
Do you have some tips how to improve the results of search engines like Google for your website by using appropriate tags? Do you have any tips for improving the results for websites?
I probably don't, because I don't. Well, you need to embed the right words and search terms in your website copy, but I mean, my blog kind of looks like a website. So people think it is a website. It's not. It's a blog. And a lot of companies are now building what used to be their website on blog platforms because it allows them to get the search boost that blog platforms provide. It also allows them to update their copy and change their content faster and more easily than before. So I'm not an expert in HTML. I'm not even not an expert in blog platforms either. But I just know that lots of companies are switching to WordPress and to other platforms because of the extra boost it gives them on Google. So I don't know if we'll see the end of websites. I don't think so. HTML5 is coming out, which is going to change, I think, a lot. And it's about time, I think. So, yes?
I see the trends are changing like every 5 to 10 years or so about how media is created. So the social media a few years ago, McMaster years before that, probably websites and texting was really big. Do you see social media changing in a really different way or going away and doing maybe something else?
That's a good question. If I knew the answer to that, I would have invested in something by now. I have no idea what's going to happen in 5 years. I think cloud computing is going to be much more prevalent than it is now, although it's pretty popular recently. I think there probably will be a couple of more social media platforms. Does anyone ever use MySpace anymore? I mean, MySpace, like it's gone. Twitter is with us. Facebook is with us. There may be some others that come. Google Plus is now kind of beginning to get some traction. So I don't know what the next great thing is. I do think whatever it is, the constant will be conversation and a way for people to connect with one another around shared passions. And that's the glory of social media, is that people who are interested in obscure things now have a place to meet other people who are also interested in that obscure topic. I mean, you would never turn on CBC television and find a podcast about ant farming, or not a podcast, find a show about ant farming, but I'm sure there's a podcast on iTunes about ant farming, probably 3 or 4 of them. So social media is great for, I sort of think of it as narrow casting or niche casting as opposed to broadcasting. It's a great way to gather people in far-flung places. There was a podcast, I go to a lot of podcasting conferences, and there's this woman, I think she lives in Kitchener-Waterloo, who has a podcast exclusively about Marilyn Monroe. She's just fascinated by Marilyn Monroe. And she has, I don't want to say thousands, but hundreds of listeners around the world to her podcast about Marilyn Monroe. So the numbers in social media are often smaller, but in social media, it's not the quantity of your audience that's important, it's the quality of your audience. And for her to have hundreds of Marilyn Monroe fans around the world, she would never be able to connect with them in any other era than now. So it's a great time to be doing that kind of thing. Yes?
Is it appropriate to just be applying for a job with your LinkedIn link, or should you still be sending resumes?
That's a good question. For some, it would be appropriate. For others, they won't even know what LinkedIn is, depending on where you're applying and to whom you are applying. I think it's probably better to cover off both. I know for us, because our firm is so involved with social media, if there isn't some kind of a digital presence, that gives us cause for concern. So I love to see LinkedIn, and if you want to send your blog and your Twitter handle so we can check out your Twitter stream, that kind of stuff, I think that's always a good thing. But if you're applying to the 65-year-old bank president, and not to put them down, they may well be on Twitter for all I know, but they're probably going to expect a cover letter and a resume as the first step. But you can put in your cover letter and in your resume all your social media handles, and that's a nice blend of the old and the new. Thank you very much. I hope the conference goes well. I hope you all find the jobs and the careers you are looking for. So thank you.